The Nobel Prize-winning godfather of AI, Geoffrey Hinton, talks about how proud he is of some of his students in the field of AI, including one that fired Sam Altman from OpenAI.
Subscribe for more sweet AI content.
So Geoffrey Hinton is not a fan of Sam Altman's leadership. He said that he believes that Altman values profits over safety. And I wasn't exactly sure at first who he was referring to, but of course it's Ilya Sutskever during that brief sort of saga in November 2023, where Sam Altman actually was fired for the weekend for 3 days, right around Thanksgiving, I think it was. And of course, Ilya Sutskever, along with several other members of the board, played a key role in that. And so here, Geoffrey Hinton is sort of like stating that he's very proud that it happened, that that was the correct thing to do. And of course, right now, he's kind of in the spotlight because he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for this year, for 2024, which I think some physicists were a little bit annoyed by this because certainly he's more a computer science person. One of his big contributions to AI was this idea of the neural nets. In fact, at a time when the idea that neural nets would work as effectively as they seem to be working now, there was a time when that was not a fashionable belief. That a lot of people spoke out against it, said that it was a dead end. And it was Geoffrey Hinton, in fact, that kind of stayed true to this idea. He had belief and confidence that neural nets, modeled after sort of our brain, the neural nets in our brain, that concept would work for machine learning. It would transfer to computers to create intelligence in computers the way that the neural networks in our brain create intelligence in us. So let's take a quick look at what he said.
I'm still slightly in shock. I got a phone call at 1 o'clock in the morning in California. I thought about whether I should answer it or not, and luckily I decided I would see who was calling. And I was extremely surprised to get the Nobel Prize in Physics. I never expected that. I think of the prize as a recognition of a large community of people who worked on neural networks for many years before they worked really well. I'd particularly like to acknowledge my two main mentors, David Rumelhart, with whom I worked on the backpropagation algorithm. David died of a nasty brain disease quite young. But for that, he would be here instead of me. And my colleague Terry Sinofsky, who I worked with a lot in the 1980s on Boltzmann machines, and who taught me a lot about the brain. I'd also like to acknowledge my students. I was particularly fortunate to have many very clever students, much cleverer than me, who actually made things work. They've gone on to do great things. I'm particularly proud of the fact that one of my students fired Sam Altman. And I think I'd better leave it there and leave it for questions. Well, we're taking a minute. I'd like to say I should also acknowledge Joshua Bengio and Yann LeCun, who were close colleagues and were very instrumental in developing this whole field. I'm hoping AI will lead to tremendous benefits, to tremendous increases in productivity, and to a better life for everybody. I'm convinced that it will do that in healthcare. My worry is that it may also lead to bad things. And in particular, when we get things more intelligent than ourselves, no one really knows whether we're going to be able to control them.
How do we avoid catastrophic scenarios?
We don't know how to avoid them all at present. That's why we urgently need more research. So I'm advocating that our best young researchers, or many of them, should work on AI safety, and governments should force the large companies to provide the computational facilities that they need to do that.
Do you believe it might become more intelligent than humans? Why and how quickly do you believe that could take place?
Okay, so most of the top researchers I know believe that AI will become more intelligent than people. They vary on the timescales. A lot of them believe that that will happen sometime in the next 20 years. Some of them believe it will happen sooner. Some of them believe it will take much longer. But quite a few good researchers believe that sometime in the next 20 years, AI will become more intelligent than us. And we need to think hard about what happens then.
Do you think students and even professionals over-relying on LLMs is going to have a dumbing down effect, or will we operate on a higher order?
I don't think it will have a significant dumbing down effect. I think it'll be like what happened when they first had pocket calculators. And people said, oh, kids won't learn math anymore. They won't be able to do multiplication. Well, you don't need to be able to do multiplication if you've got a pocket calculator. And I think it'll be the same with LLMs. People maybe won't remember as many facts that you can just ask an LLM and it will know. But I think it'll make people smarter, not dumber.
You used the word flabbergasted when you learned about the award. Why were you so surprised?
It's not
I had
physics.
absolutely no idea that I'd even been nominated. I'm not a physicist. I have very high respect for physics. I dropped out of physics after my first year at university because I couldn't do the complicated math. So getting an award in physics was very surprising to me. I'm very pleased that the Nobel Committee recognized that there's been huge progress in the area of artificial neural nets. And Hopfield's work was closely related to physics. And some of the early work I did with Terry Sinofsky on Boltzmann machines was inspired by statistical physics. But more recently, the work has had less relationship to physics. And so I was very surprised that I got a prize in physics.
Can you please elaborate on your comment earlier on the call about Sam Altman?
So OpenAI was set up with a big emphasis on safety. Its primary objective was to develop artificial general intelligence and ensure that it was safe. One of my former students, Ilya Sutskever, was the chief scientist. And over time, it turned out that Sam Altman was much less concerned with safety than with profits. And I think that's unfortunate.
You mentioned the uncertain future around AI and the need for greater understanding of its potential opportunities and risks. Do you believe governments look at stepping in to regulate AI more strictly? How can governments better support AI research?
I think governments can encourage the big companies to spend more of their resources on safety research. So at present, almost all of the resources go into making the models better, so they can have shiny new models. And there's a big competition going on, and the models are getting much better, and that's good. But we need to accompany that with a comparable effort on AI safety. The effort needs to be more than like 1%. It needs to be like maybe a third of the effort goes into AI safety, because if this stuff becomes unsafe, that's extremely bad.
Any plans for the money that comes with the Nobel yet?
No specific plans. I'm going to give it away to charities, but I know one charity I'll give some to, which provides jobs for neurodiverse young adults. I will give it to some other charities, but I don't know which yet.
If you have ADHD and you got excited when he said that, probably wasn't talking about that. I don't know. Just a hunch.
Any recommendations for how to prevent serious consequences in the future? By that, they mean how people should be careful of AI and its use. As you warned, it can be dangerous.
I don't think individual people being careful in how they use it is going to solve the problems. I think the people developing AI need to be careful how they develop it. And I think research needs to be done in the big companies which have the resources. I'm not convinced that the way individual people use it is going to make much difference.
I know you said it's hard to predict what going bad might mean, but if you had to hazard a stab at some rough areas of concern, what would those be?
So there are many different risks from AI, and they all have different solutions. So immediate risks are things like fake videos corrupting elections. We've already seen politicians either accuse other people of using fake videos or use fake videos themselves and fake images. So that's one immediate danger. There's also very immediate dangers from things like cyber attacks. So last year, for example, there was a 1,200% increase in the number of phishing attacks. And that's because these large language models make it very easy to do phishing attacks. And you can no longer recognize them by the fact the spelling's wrong and the syntax is slightly odd. Their English is perfect.
That was a little bit underwhelming, I'm going to say, because he mentioned just kind of the immediate scenarios, but I think he's a lot more concerned by some of the longer term potential risks. So I certainly would have liked to hear more about that, specifically what he's concerned about. But from what I've recently heard him talk about before, I mean, it is basically a super intelligence through some one method or another, maybe, I mean, having some sort of a catastrophic outcome, perhaps the elimination of a life, something like that, of all life. I mean, it's very hard to predict how that actually happens, because if you consider something with the intelligence greater than, let's say, the entire human race, let's say, you can't really predict what it will do. If you think of a super intelligent chess AI, for example, you know it's going to beat you. You have no idea how. You can't possibly know what moves it makes, or maybe even explain why they're good moves, but you know it will beat you. And that's, I think, the point that a lot of people that are cautioning about AI are trying to make. Like, a super intelligence will be able to figure out how to deal with all of us if that becomes its alignment, its intention. We might not even know of the myriad of ways in which it might do so. And that's why it's so important to get this idea, this alignment correctly. How do we make sure that its goals never conflict with ours? And I know saying its goals makes it sound like it's an entity with its own sort of wants. It doesn't have to be. And that's why they use that terminology of alignment, right? So it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to want something or not want something. It could be just the path that we set it on might not be aligned with what we want, either because we make a mistake or it misinterprets something or whatever. But there's sort of other scenarios, such as I've heard it referred to as like P1984. So it's the probability of a authoritarian regime using some sort of a ASI, some super intelligence to basically, I mean, that could be sort of the last tyrant on the planet Earth, right? Somebody that's able to just take power and potentially be extremely immune to giving back that power, right? Potentially being impossible to dethrone or assassinate or anything like that. So whether sort of human misuse or some sort of an accidental thing that ends up in catastrophic scenarios. My personal pet peeve is when people talk exclusively about that sort of Terminator scenario without talking about the potential authoritarian scenario, where they're saying like the only way we can avoid this catastrophe is just by having the governments 100% take care of everything because the governments can do no wrong. I mean, obviously we need to also consider the possibility of some authoritarian influence then using that power to then have control over AI. So to me personally, I think it's very important that we kind of at least mention all the different ways in which it could go wrong, not just have our like one favorite theory that we're trying to protect against while ignoring the other dangers. And of course, this whole scenario is made even more complicated by the fact that there's a bit of a kind of a race condition between nations as well. US is trying to prevent the export of NVIDIA chips to China, for example, or at least of some of the more powerful chips. They're still getting over there. But it's that idea that limitations cause creativity, or at least sort of enable creativity. This was published recently, talking about China's upgraded light-powered AGI chip. And so I think they referred to it as 6 orders of magnitude more efficient, right? So it's a million times or more, sort of more efficient than before. And so that's another sort of point being made. So let's say we did sort of all combine our efforts to slow down AI research, focus on AI safety. And we did that, all the countries got together and agreed, right? But then there would be a clear incentive for if one country was able to keep developing AI in secret while everyone else slowed down the research in the name of safety. Certainly that's another potential risk. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen or that that's necessarily a bad idea, but the point is the situation is complicated. There aren't clear-cut answers. Next, he's asked about sort of his advice for people who have a belief that goes maybe against the popular opinion of the time. Because keep in mind, he believed in the power of neural networks to kind of move the field of machine learning forward for a long time, while other people completely gave up on it. So this is somebody that sort of persisted in believing in his vision when everyone else in the field told him it was a dead end. It's entirely possible we might not be here if it was not for this person, meaning we wouldn't have this much progress with AI, with neural nets.
You persisted with research in artificial neural networks, even during periods of waning interest in the topic among the scientific community. Do you have a message for professors and students about persisting with endeavors that may be deemed unpopular or futile?
I think my message is this. If you believe in something, don't give up on it until you understand why that belief is wrong. Often you believe in things and you eventually figure out why that's a wrong thing to believe in. But so long as you believe in something and you can't see why that's wrong, like the brain has to work somehow, so we have to figure out how it learns the connection strengths to make it work. So long as you believe in that, keep working on it and don't let people tell you it's nonsense if you can't see why it's nonsense.
This reminded me of a poll that I put out yesterday for all of you to answer, where I basically said, does genius just mean high intelligence? In other words, let's say you have some sort of a metric for intelligence, IQ, or there has been other proposed sort of measurements, but the point, it doesn't matter what that unit is. Let's say we're able to measure intelligence in some units, and it's fairly accurate. Does genius mean you're just above a certain threshold? So you're above a certain, if you're in the top 1% of the population by intelligence, that means you're a genius or whatever that number is. Or is genius something different and not necessarily related to intelligence? I mean, maybe you need to have high intelligence to be a genius, but genius itself isn't just a function of intelligence. Maybe some wiring in the brain that gives you an ability to do something others simply cannot do. And so interestingly, almost 60% said that yes, genius is probably some rare cognitive ability, not just high intelligence. 20% saying genius is basically just high intelligence. And 8% of you just wanted to say that I was wrong and just the whole question is wrong, which I'm going to start putting that more because there's a number of you that just want to be like, no, the whole premise is wrong. And we've had some great comments on that as well, including people bringing up Plato and Aristotle as potentially kind of the things that they talked about. The thing that I saw on Twitter/X that got me to post this poll, I guess. Somebody said that, for example, so synesthesia is a rare brain condition that causes some senses to involuntarily fuse together, creating what's nearly a sixth sense. So in other words, some sort of a neurons wiring and firing together in a way that others don't have. So some new sort of cognitive ability. And they actually use the term intellectual synesthesia, right? So this idea that what if some additional neurons that wire together in a new way, allowing the person some cognitive abilities that most humans don't have and can't have, regardless of how high their IQ is. So that idea, if I'm understanding it correctly, is that genius might be some specific wiring of the brain that you can kind of point to and say, this weird wiring creates this person's ability to do this cognitive task that we don't really see other people being able to do across the entire spectrum of intelligence. The idea came from, in part, this blog post as well as some posts on Twitter. I'll link it below if you want to read it, but it's titled Intelligence Killed Genius. And it starts, where did all the geniuses go? They were killed by the concept of intelligence. The first requirement to do genius level work is to not be afraid to do things that only geniuses can do, to have the internal feeling of being better than everyone else in the world. And so the idea of intelligence kind of kills that feeling, right? Because however smart you might be, there's someone else who is smarter than you, right? If intelligence can be measured in units and you have, X number of intelligence units, right? Then somebody else can, have X plus 20 intelligence units. They're smarter than you. So in that sort of linear way of looking at it, they're smarter than you. They have more intelligence. And this blog post kind of claims, or at least tries to make the point, that if there's someone smarter than you are, it doesn't make sense to work on the hardest possible problems and try to change the world. It's the smartest person's job. So to be clear, they're not making that point. They're saying this is why a lot of people that are geniuses tend to not go after the problems that they think they might be best in the world at, because they might have met somebody that's smarter than them, quote unquote, somebody that has higher intelligence. So they're saying, well, they should handle that problem. Their intelligence is higher. He continues, I don't need to be the smartest person in the world. I know a few people who I believe to be geniuses. What happens when I tell them I believe they're a genius? They all tell me that there are people smarter than them and that they're only pretty good at one of two things. He continues, bleep, this is exactly what a genius is. Right? They're saying genius is being extremely good at a couple of things that really matter. Genius is having a vision. Genius is not just having the highest G, kind of like general intelligence. Genius is not, 5 standard deviations to the right of G. Right? He's saying genius is like synesthesia, right? So it's the stray connections between parts of the brain that were not supposed to be connected that make your picture completely different, but might leave you just 2 to 4 standard deviations to the right in G, orthogonal to intelligence. Genius is not being perfect, it's being unbalanced. And this idea, to me, just kind of intuitively makes sense. And one thing that's really exciting about AI, to me at least in particular, is that we just might learn a lot more about the human brain because of our progress in AI. We might learn more about intelligence and genius, and we might even come up with some new words and new concepts that we haven't heard before, we haven't had before, to describe the various cognitive feats and abilities that exist. And that's why, to me, it's so interesting to listen to this person, Geoffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI, for a number of different reasons. One is a lot of people told him that what he was working on, neural nets, trying to copy the human brain and reproduce it in a machine, that was not going to work, that it was a dead end. Probably some of those people were far smarter than he is in certain metrics, maybe, right? But he said, nope, I'm going to keep going with this. I'm going to keep doing my thing. And his persistence, and of course, that's coupled with a lot of other people, right? The transformer architecture from Google and many, many others, all those people, their work combined to this explosion in AI that we're seeing today. But it wasn't guaranteed that we get here. It wasn't guaranteed that AI would come through the development of a human brain-like thing in a machine. Maybe we would find some completely other way of approaching it, which is all to say that I think that I truly agree with this Nobel Prize given to Geoffrey Hinton. I'm sure it ruffled quite a few feathers, but for whatever it's worth, it gets a 100% approval from me. And in closely related news, we have some more Nobel Prize nominations, or here actual awards, it looks like. So the person you'd most likely to recognize is Demis Hassabis. So he's, of course, the founder and current CEO of Google DeepMind. So David Baker, Demis Hassabis, and John M. Jumper have been awarded 2024 Nobel Prize for Chemistry. So one half to Baker for computational protein design, and the second half jointly to Hassabis and Jumper for protein structure prediction. And of course, the DeepMind team have been on an absolute tear, releasing some pretty incredible applications of their AI technology, not just in the protein space. There's this word proteomics. You're going to be hearing that a lot more. So kind of like genomics, right? The idea of studying the genome, the human DNA. This is proteomics, kind of decoding the structure and functionality of proteins. So AlphaFold was kind of the big breakthrough because the system that DeepMind came up with, the AI model, was able to predict the 3D structures of proteins. Right? Proteins are kind of like the little factories that make everything about life possible, from being able to see, to digest, to just to move, breathe, everything. And so we humans, we meticulously figured out how some of the proteins are folded, their 3D structure. We used X-ray crystallography for that. That's the thing that apparently Walter White from Breaking Bad, that was what he was supposedly really good at. That was the first thing that he did really well. And so once we kind of slowly and very expensively figured out certain protein structures, we fed it into AlphaFold as data, and it got really good at predicting new proteins that we didn't know the structure of before. And so this is what they're talking about here. Hassabis and Jumper developed an artificial intelligence model to solve the 50-year problem of predicting proteins' complex structures, right? The 3D design, the 3D structure of those proteins. And so that was kind of a big deal. Since then, they took it a step further with Alpha Proteo that generates novel proteins for biology and health research. So it designs new proteins, sort of on demand, like those online shirt printing companies where you're like, I want a shirt that looks like this. And then they print it for you on demand and they give it to you like that, but for proteins. I'm slightly exaggerating. So this new AI system from DeepMind, it's able to design proteins that successfully bind to target molecules. And these sort of binding sites, what they allow us to do is to have more control over the functionalities of these molecules, of these proteins. So for example, here's a protein. Let's say this is a protein in your body, and we want to be able to add some functionality or some control over this protein. Now, we don't have a way of easily affecting the functionality of this protein. We can't easily kill it or strengthen it or have it do something else. But this Alpha Proteo can design a binder, a protein that attaches itself to this binding site on the target protein that can add certain functionality that we want for this target protein. And they gave examples of things where, for example, proteins involved in cancer or viral infection of HIV, chronic pain, autoimmune disease, etc. This kind of seems like a big deal. Again, most of the stuff that life does is proteins. That functionality comes from proteins. Demis Hassabis himself was, during an interview, said that advancements in this field could potentially cure disease in the next 10 to 20 years. This is not a person that's prone to hyperbole. This is not a person that hypes things up. And he's saying that this could cure all disease in the next 10 to 20 years. And I don't know enough about this stuff to really talk about this too much, but certainly it seems like a lot of the stuff that causes aging, a lot of the things that makes us more frail and weak over time, as the AI models get better at designing this stuff and we get better at implementing this stuff, what does that mean for our longevity, for our health, for our ability to program how we look and move and all of that stuff? I don't want to overhype things, but I'll tell you this. I, for one, am hyped. If amino acids and proteins are the building blocks of life, and we figured out how to custom build these building blocks of life, is there anything that we won't be able to build, to change, to improve? Anyways, I think I'll leave it here for today. I'm not as familiar with David Baker and John M. Jumper, but in terms of Demis Hassabis, in terms of Geoffrey Hinton, I, for one, am very ecstatic and happy with the fact that they were nominated and awarded these prizes. I think these people made some of the biggest contributions to artificial intelligence. And also, interestingly, since there was a little bit of a backlash to somebody in the computer science field getting the physics award, right? Because Geoffrey Hinton, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in physics. But it is sparking a very interesting discussion because as these neural networks, as these AI models improve, as they get applied to more and more fields, as it does more and more science and discovery and innovation and progress, who do you give the award to? You're not going to give it to the AI model. I don't think we're there yet where we're ready to kind of just hand off the baton to the next great intelligence. So certainly we're going to give it to the creator of the model, or the person that had the biggest sort of contribution to creating the model. So when the model makes a breakthrough in chemistry, we'll give it to the person that designed the neural network behind that. When an AI model makes great progress, makes great breakthroughs and innovation in physics, we'll probably give it to like the human being that created that model. This is what's coming. The conversation about this is what's coming. This is like the very first of it that we're seeing. You're witnessing it live. What a time to be alive, as they say. Tune in next time when we discuss, can mayonnaise hold the key to unlocking nuclear fusion? We're probably not going to cover that. But make sure you're subscribed. Hit the thumbs up button. That teaches the neural networks behind YouTube to recommend this content to more people. I really appreciate that. My name is Wes Roth. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. I appreciate each and every single one of you. We got big things ahead. Stay tuned. I'll see you next time.